I'm delighted to say that an old adversary, I think is the right word to say, is back on the show. Hasn't been here for a while. He is, of course, Dale Vince, OBE, who is now the proud author of a book called Manifesto, How a Maverick Entrepreneur Took on British Energy and Won. It says he's founder of Ecotricity, which, of course, is the green energy company. He's also the owner of Forest Green Rovers, the football club. He's also, according to this, United Nations climate champion. Dale, welcome back. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Mike. Good to be back.
Very nice to see you. I'm sorry we haven't spoken for such a long time. We've been a bit sort of distracted with the coronavirus pandemic, is all I can say.
Yes, plenty to get your teeth into there.
Well, quite. How do you get to be a United Nations climate champion? I'd quite like that.
Yeah, it's not a bad gig, actually. I mean, I don't get paid or anything like that, but it just came about once we started talking to the UN about 3 years ago. They liked what we were doing at Forest Green. They were planning a global version. It's called Sport for Climate Action. It's about engaging the whole world of sport in the fight against climate change. And we were co-founders, co-signatories of that plan. And yeah, it came out of that.
Okay, and the book, I don't know if you've written a book before, but I mean, it's you've very kindly written into it a little note that says, read this, it could change your life. Now, I haven't read all of it, but I've read bits of it, and so far my life hasn't changed at all. So when's that going to happen?
Well, I don't know how far you've got, but just keep at it, Mike. You made me laugh. I thought you said, I don't know if you've ever read a book. You said
no.
didn't you?
No, listen, you know me, Dale. I'm far from one of those snobby radio people who make out that some people are not as clever as I am. I would never do that because I know it's not true. But the last time you were in this building, we spoke about your sort of your story, if you like, because it is quite an interesting story that you came from being a bit of a crusty, really, a guy who kind of dropped out of society, ended up as a bit of a hippie, but then kind of built this amazing business.
Yeah, that's right. I spent 10 years living on the road as a new age traveler. I learned a lot in that time. I lived in a lot of different vehicles, buses, trucks, ambulances and stuff. And I became really self-sufficient in kind of changing engines and rebuilding them and stuff like that. And then it was early 90s. I had a little windmill on the roof of my trailer. So I was kind of familiar with renewable energy. And I saw the first big wind farm built in Cornwall. And I thought, you know what, I could spend 10 more years doing this, or I could drop back in and do something else. And that's how it began.
And I mean, you say that as if it was easy to do, but I mean, it's not that simple, is it, to go from literally not really being in a position to own anything to running a multi-million pound business? I mean, there are those who might say you must have had a bit of luck along the way, surely.
Well, I must have had an awful lot of luck, I think, but I had an awful lot of pig-headedness as well, which is a kind of an attribute that I have in I'd say, bucket loads.
I think this is where we share a common theme.
So it took actually 5 years, Mike, to build that first windmill from the early 90s to 1996, actually, right. Friday the 13th of December. I remember that well. And it took 5 years of battling everything and everybody to make it happen. And I think after that, it became a little bit easier, but we had an awful lot of big events and luck as well after that for the next 20 years to get to here.
Right. And of course, green energy now is very much the trendy thing to be. I mean, we just saw a couple of weeks ago Boris Johnson announcing his green industrial revolution, which I personally think is a load of old cobblers. I don't think he'll ever achieve what it is that he wants to achieve. But it's very much the place to be, to get the funding, to get the grants, to get all of that. I mean, a lot of people say to me, if you're involved in green energy, you basically have a license to print money, because you'll get grants from the European Union, you'll get grants from the British government, and you'll be able to run a business literally with other people's money.
If only what those people were saying were true.
Well, you say you didn't get any subsidies from anyone?
I'm saying there's no money from the EU. There's actually no money from this government. The support scheme for renewable energy was actually run through energy companies themselves. So I think it was, it might have been Labour that set this up as a scheme to support renewable energy. It obliged power companies to buy a certain amount, and that created a market for it. And so it was done that way. So not a subsidy from our government, no money from the EU, and even the support from our government that did exist through this scheme has ended about 5 years ago under David Cameron. So
well, even as he was putting his own windmill up.
Wow, yeah, I mean, he did that, didn't he? He set out hugging huskies and putting that little windmill on his roof, which is pretty futile, I have to say. Right. But the time he left office, he'd banned onshore wind and banned solar. and was driving fracking, was pushing that on us, wasn't he? Against all the odds.
Well, I mean, not necessarily against all the odds, but against the green sort of lobby, which is huge now. I mean, if you look at Extinction Rebellion and what they've managed to achieve, I'm no fan of theirs, as you know, but they've managed to get themselves into a meeting with Michael Gove. They've managed to get government policy to start adopting some of their recommendations, and they've also managed to lie down and completely bring London to a standstill on several occasions without ever really being caught up about it.
Yeah, I think the push for fracking was against all logic. It was against economics. It was against environment issues. There were safety concerns. George Osborne had to create the most generous tax regime in the world, in his own words, to try and make it happen. They had to change planning law and environment law and take the planning decision out of the hands of local councils just to try and force it through. And public opinion was about 70% against fracking. So that's what I mean by against all the odds. Extinction Rebellion have probably got the government a little bit scared, I would say, because of the scale of the demonstrations and, as you say, laying down in front of stuff and basically disrupting life. But I'm with them. If we don't do that, then I don't think we get enough attention for these issues, because these are life-threatening issues.
Yeah, but that's the trouble, Dale. I'm a great believer in public opinion, but I don't believe in public opinion polls, because they can be manipulated and they can be made to say anything. I mean, I go with the people that I talk to on this show, the people that I see on everyday missions around the country, people who have ordinary jobs, people who have real struggles, particularly at the moment, economically, just to get their day done and their work done without interference from the government, without being penalised by these kind of green taxes which come in.
Yeah, understood. The polls I was referring to were taken by the government themselves and have been taken for about the last 20 years on a very consistent basis.
You're not going to stand there and try and convince me that the government's telling us the truth, are you?
But the polls were taken on a very consistent basis, and they showed about 70% for onshore wind support and about 70% opposition to fracking, and that was a very consistent figure. But I take what you mean, people struggling to get on with the normal lives without government interference and stuff like that. I'd make this point, Mike, that during the pandemic, the disruption to our everyday lives has been incredible. It's been extreme. And the kind of changes we need to make to fight the climate crisis are very small by comparison. It shows that we can do it.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are so many different aspects to the conversation. And in your book, you talk about what you said to me before, that you're not just about energy, you're about changing people's habits in all sorts of ways. You don't want people to think about eating animals. You don't want people to think about travelling really in the same way that they did. So, I mean, you presumably would be quite happy with where we are at the moment in terms of the fact that nobody's going anywhere.
Well, there are some upsides, let's say.
Well, I'm not very happy about it. The only place I've been on holiday this year is the Isle of Wight.
I think you can still go there. It's tier 1, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. No,
it's not that much fun. I'm not going back for a while.
Energy, transport and food, Mike. It's about how we power ourselves, how we travel and what we eat. And it's not about giving stuff up. We can still have energy, we can still travel and still eat. It's just about doing them in a different way. That's the theme of the book, and it's all there condensed in chapter 13, the actual manifesto itself.
Yeah, but you've said that you want people to stop eating animals, that you want them to replace their diets with plants.
Yeah, we need to. I mean, industrial farming is killing us, literally. I mean, it's causing direct human health hazards. It's one of the biggest drivers of the climate crisis and water pollution and land pollution and that kind of stuff. And of course, it's responsible for zoonotic viruses like this coronavirus that we're now fighting. There are about 30 of them known in the world. You could list a handful of them that have hit us in the last 10 or 20 years. This is just the latest one, and it comes from factory farming.
Well, what do you make of the farming announcements today that the government are making, the changes they're making to farming, where they're saying they're going to change the way that farms are subsidised? They're no longer going to be subsidised based on their size, but more now based on how environmentally friendly they are.
Well, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that up until now, as a landowner, you simply got given money for owning land. That's the basis of it. Nearly £2 billion a year given to people that own land. And what they're saying is, as you say, in the future, they'll only get the money if they create wildlife habitats and stuff like that. It's exactly the kind of thing that we need to do. It's, again, a theme of my book. We need to take the subsidies that we're giving at the moment, which are driving the wrong kind of behavior, and use them instead to drive the right kind of behavior.
But see, this is where people start falling out with you, when you start talking about the right kind of behavior and the wrong kind of behavior. I mean, who are you to say what's right and wrong?
Well, it's not a moral judgment. It's a logical, scientific judgment, Mike. In the last 50, 60 years in our country, we've had the most enormous decline in wildlife, and it's due to industrial farming and the way that we treat the land. And it comes back to the food point. If we all gave up eating meat, we could give back 75% of all of Britain's farmland, give it back to nature. So what the government
Well,
are
we'll give
talking
it back
about
to
today
what?
is
To what though? What? So it would just be
to run
rough land.
wild.
What?
To run wild, absolutely, yeah.
Well, what about the
Yeah.
people that own it? What are you going to give them?
Well, they can have some of this £2 billion, which the
Really?
government are going to pay them to do that.
Right. But
Absolutely.
I had a leg of lamb at the weekend, right, which was one of the greatest things I've ever tasted in my life. It was a particularly good one. It was particularly organic. You cannot tell me that anything that grows out of the ground is going to taste anything like that, and I'm never going to be convinced by that. And if you do away with people eating, for example, lamb, what are you going to do with all the wildlife which is actually eaten?
You lost me there. Which wildlife that is actually eaten?
Well, if
What do
you're
you mean,
eating
Mike?
if you're eating lambs and you're eating mutton and you're eating cows and you're eating pigs, where do they all go?
Well, if we stop eating them, then we don't need them, do we? They won't go
Well, what do you
anywhere.
mean you don't need them? They're just going to walk around? Are they just going to wander about?
Well, they don't do that now, do they? They get killed and they end up on your plate. So if we were to do this, there would be a wind down, wouldn't there, from where we are today with there's 1 billion animals a
Well, you
year
just let them
killed in
die of
Britain
old
for
age.
food.
Well, you just let them die of
No,
old
no,
age.
no. You could eat them, Mike, but over a period of a few years, we'd go from 1 billion animals a year killed in Britain to none, and we wouldn't produce them at the moment. I mean, animals are raped basically in order to get them pregnant so that they have other animals, and that's a continuous chain
How
of
do you know they're
farming.
not consenting to that?
I don't
I mean,
think
come on.
anybody asks them, do they? Come on, Mike.
Listen.
Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, I have.
It's an
But the
hideous
point,
process.
well, I mean, the whole food chain is pretty hideous. But I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't eat food because we want to eat food. You can't change the way that people eat just because you want to.
The whole animal food chain is hideous. Absolutely, I agree. But plant eating is not hideous, and
Well, it's
and
just
it's
the
not
people that eat
because I
plants that are
want to.
hideous.
It's not because I want to, Mike. It's science and logic. It's driving the
Yeah, but
climate
the
crisis. It's
science.
causing
Yeah, but
human health problems.
science is the same science that's causing us to ruin every single city in this country and possibly in the world, thanks to these scientists who are telling us that we have to shut everything in order to stop something which can't be stopped.
Well, I think we can see that it can be stopped or slowed down. At least we can see that when we do the wrong things, we get peaks of infection and deaths and that
Nobody
kind of
really
stuff.
understands it, though, Dale. They don't know what's causing the peaks and the troughs. They really don't.
Well, it's human contact, isn't it?
No,
I mean,
because we
that's
didn't
obvious.
get any peaks in July when they opened the pubs. We didn't get any peaks in August when people were going to festivals and people were going out a lot and going to beaches. No peaks. Suddenly we get peaks. Guess why? Because people get tested when they go back to university and when schools go back. Simple.
Well, I think schools and universities have definitely contributed in September. So you're right to point that out. And I think August was the big Eat Out to Help Out month. And I think that was a big factor as well. And there is a lag, of course, between contact, infection and reporting of infection. We see that in the data all of the time.
Well, they tell us
So I
that,
think
but
we
we don't
can.
know. Well, they tell us that, but then they've also told us that there is now the infection rate is coming down, but it's not the same lag as when it went up. You know what I mean? You can take your science and you can take your pick of it, if you like, in every single aspect of life.
I think the science makes sense. I look at the graphs and it makes sense to me. August and September, we changed radically how we did things. We opened up pubs. We drove people into pubs and onto the high streets. September, we opened up schools and universities.
Yeah. So why wasn't it the same effect?
Well, I think we started to feel that in October, which led to the November lockdown. And
But if
now,
something that happened in,
99%
all right, well, hang on. But if something that happened in July felt the effect in October, how is the September effect now disappearing?
no, I'm saying August and September. I don't think July was such a big deal.
Well, July
But
was
August
when
and
everybody went
September.
back to the pubs, though. That was when they opened the pubs. I can tell you, it got a lot busier around here.
Yeah, but August was Eat Out to Help Out month, wasn't it, when it kicked off in earnest, and September was schools and universities.
Yeah.
So, you can see it in the data.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is you
99% of us are now in a tier 2 or a tier 3, aren't we?
Yeah.
Whereas, before November,
So
it was,
what does that tell you?
it tells us that actually, I don't think the government are properly in control of things.
No, exactly. It tells you that they don't know what they're doing. It tells you that all of the various the restrictions that have been placed upon us haven't worked. And that's the only conclusion you can make.
We can agree on the first point. They definitely don't know what they're doing. I think they're doing their best, bless them, but they're not doing well
Bless
enough.
them.
I think they're driven by politics quite often. Look, take this for example, Mike. We ran a football game in September, a pilot game, got 1,000 fans in, passed the whole thing with flying colours. Days later, the government said no more fans at football. We were tier one. Okay, we've just had a lockdown for the whole of November. We've come out of it in tier two, and we can have fans back at football. How does that make any sense?
I know. Well, mind you, 1,000 fans for you is more than you normally get, isn't it?
Cheap, Mike.
Sorry, I know. I had to get one in. Listen, Dale, good to talk to you. I'm going to hold the book up. Here it is. Is it available in all the usual places?
All the usual places, Mike. Thank you.
Top man. Thank you
Pleasure
very
to
much
talk to you
indeed.
again.
Dale Vince, OBE, United Nations climate champion, a man that disagrees with me about almost everything. But hey, we can always have a rational and normal conversation, which is why I like him, and which is why the Independent Republican Mike Graham is the only place to be for common sense